for being here, Jaime. So, first of all, do you have any messages to the audience?
I need the lunch.
Okay, that's a very concrete and very short answer. Okay.
But I'm happy to be here. I only had 2 hours of sleep yet, but I know it's worth the sacrifice because I like to always be back home and be together with our incoming ambassador to China. We cannot have any better choice than my comrade Chito. As they say in China, with you in charge, I am at ease. 你办事我放心。
That's very typical Chinese. Okay, anyways, talking about Ambassador Staromada, can you share with us your stories back in 1971? How did you go to China, and what made you both stay there for such a long time, for more than 3 decades, more than 4 decades? That's really long. That's even longer than I did in China.
Chito was the delegation head of our group, which was called the Philippine Youth Delegation. We were 15 youth leaders, student leaders from different organizations and universities, formed especially upon the invitation of the China Friendship Association. We were invited for three weeks, and imagine, it's really like visiting North Korea now. At that time when we went to China, China was an isolated state. It was called Red China at that time. That intriguing state under Mao was called Red China, behind the bamboo curtain. And of course, as youth, we were very curious about what this Red China was like. And yet, our passports at that time, our Philippine passports, were stamped with a note saying not valid in communist-controlled countries like the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, China, and Korea, and Vietnam. So technically, we were breaking the law by going to China at that time. So we went through Hong Kong for a day or 2. That's where we got our Chinese visa from the China Travel Association. At that time, the visa was not stamped on our passport. It was a piece of paper that you staple on your passport so that when you go out of China, you can rip it off and say you only went to Hong Kong, no problem.
That's like the Chinese passport applying for Filipino visa today. You still get a piece of paper.
Yes. But that was not because of a map.
Yeah, that's not because of a map.
Yeah, it was because it was illegal at that time for Filipinos to visit Red China. But again, it was a very fateful experience because when we were in our first few days of visit, a very abrupt political crackdown happened in Manila. The president at that time, Ferdinand Marcos, suspended the writ of habeas corpus, arrested many people like us, student leaders and politicians. And then those he could not arrest, he put on blacklists.
Including you and Ambassador Romana?
Right. So 5 up to 15 were blacklisted and we could not go home. That's how we ended up staying in China for
What was your
so many
feeling?
years.
I mean, you were told that you would not be able to go home.
We were shocked. We were
sad?
We were sad because we were homesick. We had planned to come home after 3 weeks, and the Chinese hosts tried everything to make it easy. In terms of food, in terms of comfort, but they could not solve our homesickness. And as we all know, China was going through the Cultural Revolution at that time, so it was extra difficult for us to adapt.
How did you adjust your mentality? And you both finally lived in China for such a long time. You were both enrolled into Chinese universities. You So how did you change that attitude?
The first few years was trying to adapt to the Chinese reality, including volunteering to work on the state farm. Most intellectuals at that time were sent down the countryside, so we did that too. At that time, it sounded like a romantic notion, a romantic idea. Of course, magtanim ay bibiro pala. So it turned out to be a very difficult experience physically. But again, even more difficult was not the physical rigor of farming, but the sense of isolation, the sense of monotony, and then homesickness, which is very difficult. And also we didn't know Chinese. So the first few things we had to do was to learn Chinese, learn about China, and then once we started to learn Chinese, at least we could communicate with the Chinese and make friends with them. So we did a few years on the farm, then we did a few years in a fishing corporation in Shandong. Then finally we decided to learn Chinese formally. So I did 2 years of Mandarin at the Beijing Language Institute, and then we still couldn't go home. So I enrolled at Peking University and did a 4-year course in Chinese history.
Wonderful, finally. So,
it takes us to 82.
Okay. So talking about China today, I think China is at a crossroads, especially in terms of economics. There is a big debate in China whether the role of government is too big in Chinese economy, or should the market deserve more role. So what is your take?
Well, my take is that part of the Chinese miracle, economic miracle, was due to the fact that the government stepped back from many state affairs, many economic affairs, meaning devolution of power. I know there was somebody who asked earlier, you know, how did China manage to do what they did compared to our failure to do certain things in the Philippines? And I ticked off a few points. One is China has the vision, long-term vision. They have 5-year plans, they have 10-year plans, they have a century plan. They have the vision, they have continuity, they have political will from the top, and that political will is shared among many Chinese with national pride. And then more important, I think there was a pent-up energy, you know, that was collected for many years during the Cultural Revolution, that suddenly people are allowed to do things they couldn't do business, right? So the private sector grew very quickly, and then at the top, there is this long-term plan, there's the vision to turn China into a prosperous and strong country. I think that's the secret formula.
But how about now? Do you think the market should play a bigger role, or still the government should lead the transition or reform?
I think in the end, obviously, China needed to build up still or keep the state-owned enterprises, the state sector, because it's a big job generator, right? A lot of jobs rely on state-owned enterprises. A lot of revenue also comes from state-owned enterprises. But it can no longer just rely on the state sector. In fact, the more buoyant sector is the private sector. And China needs to tap and encourage the private sector to grow, especially because they are sometimes smaller, but they're more nimble. They're more adaptable to the market. They're quicker. And so I expect that the Chinese government will continue to allow the growth of the private sector.
Actually, that is my next question to you. Because China's development relied on low-end manufacturing industry, but now that industry has lost its engine. But what is happening now is China is transitioning from the country of manufacture to a country of innovation. Do you think the drive for innovation, for entrepreneurship, will help China find another engine for growth? Or are you pessimistic about it?
No, I think they have no choice but to rely on innovation as the next source of growth, economic growth. They have already exhausted, they picked up, it's the low-lying fruit, so to speak, with the manufacturing, with cheap labor and cheap land, rent. that's over. And China can no longer just rely on that. So they need to graduate into the next growth model, which should be driven by innovation, by the private sector. And I think there's a strong push. It's on the agenda at the top, and it's being implemented in a fairly systematic way.
In a systematic way, but very upside down.
Very upside down as well.
Do you see any
but with a lot of government support. There's a lot of government funding, piloting, like innovative industries. For example, robotics, drone and pharmaceuticals. They are, I mean, that's what's admirable about China. Once it's willed by the top, it happens. And they are resourceful, they are resilient. They get it, basically, and they find ways to adapt. They know that the world economy is slowing down. They can no longer just rely on imports and exports. So they have to drive their own economy, relying on innovation.
It seems you are still very upbeat about Chinese economy, but in China, many people are getting more pessimistic. They see there are some very big risks ahead of us. For example, the property market and the stock market. First question is, what is your take? Do you think that is very risky? And my second question, do you own any property in China?
No, it's too late to own a property in China. It's already
too expensive.
It's very expensive. But yes, I agree that there is a lot of risk that there is a bubble in the property market. China is also overextended in terms of its debt. The local debt is a huge problem. I think they'll need years to digest that, to write them off or solve that. My take on China is that side by side with the economic miracle, with all the things that they have done, fantastic record. But side by side with that, we must realize that China also faces huge problems and challenges. And let me tick off a few. Of course, environmental degradation. That's a serious problem in China, which is acknowledged by the government. Part of that is the price that they have to pay for the double-digit growth that they have enjoyed the past 20 years or so. Another is corruption. There's an ongoing campaign to curb corruption. It's endemic, and again, it's not a secret. It's not a state secret. The government has been pushing this campaign to curb corruption, and with significant success. But I think they need to think of more fundamental solutions to corruption, which means doesn't China need to reform its political structure, not necessarily to go Jeffersonian democracy, but the structure which will be more transparent, there will be more accountability. I know, for example, that China has been talking of passing a sunshine law, right, to require officials to declare their assets and liabilities every year, so that it's easier for the public to know where their wealth come from and to justify whatever wealth they have. But there are still vested interests who are dragging their feet. So corruption is a big problem. There's no easy solution, but they're working on it.
Do you think the Chinese government is getting more transparent or not since President Xi Jinping comes to power? Because he has launched very forceful action to curb corruption, to fight against corruption.
It's relatively more transparent now. I think in some places they now have public biddings. Because one source of corruption is when you don't have public auction or public bidding, and you only have 2 or 3 people who can decide on a certain project, then it's very tempting, it's very easy to entice decisions with a bribe, right? When nobody's watching, it's easy to offer money to sign a deal, and it's also easy to take the money when nobody's watching. So that's a big problem, I think, that China still needs to address. With the public biddings, if they make it an institutional change, then that can help curb corruption.
Yeah, the institution